My name is Claire Whitmore, and 3 weeks before my 35th birthday, I overheard my own family discussing how to handle me once I'd served my purpose. I wasn't eavesdropping. I wasn't hiding behind a door or pressing my ear to the wall like something out of a movie. I was standing in my childhood kitchen in Evanston, Illinois, rinsing strawberries at the sink. The same sink I had leaned against at 16 while my mother lectured me about responsibility. The same one I scrubbed clean every Thanksgiving morning before anyone else woke up. The water was running. The window was cracked open. The house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. And from the dining room behind me, my mother said, casually, confidently, "She's fine for now. But after the refinance goes through, we really need to talk about boundaries." My father hummed in agreement. My younger brother laughed. And something inside me went very, very still. I turned off the faucet slowly, so the sound wouldn't cover what came next. "She's just always available," my mother continued, "which is a blessing, but also a problem. If we don't draw the line, she'll expect things." My father cleared his throat. "We've already helped her plenty." I almost laughed out loud at that. Instead, I dried my hands on a dish towel and stayed exactly where I was. My brother's voice came next, light and amused. "I mean, she doesn't have kids. She's single. What else is she doing with her money?" That was when I realized they weren't talking about me. They were talking around me, like I wasn't in the house, like I wasn't family, like I was a resource, a tool, an open tab. I didn't confront them. I didn't drop the strawberries or slam a door or demand an explanation. I finished rinsing the fruit. I arranged it on a plate. I carried it into the dining room with a polite smile and placed it in the center of the table. They all looked up at me, surprised, then instantly warm. Too warm. "Claire," my mother said brightly, "you didn't have to do that." I smiled back. "It's no trouble." And that was the moment I understood something that would change my life. They truly believed that. I used to think my family was close, not the loud, messy, emotional kind of close you see on TV, but the respectable kind. The kind where everyone shows up. The kind where you don't talk about feelings, but you help each other move. The kind where nothing is ever said, but everything is expected. We were a good Midwestern family, solid, dependable. Church on Sundays, dinners on Wednesdays, no scandals, no shouting matches. From the outside, we looked functional, loving even. From the inside, we ran on a quiet hierarchy I didn't fully understand until much later. My parents were never cruel, not in obvious ways. They didn't scream or insult or hit. They believed deeply in being good people. But they also believed in roles. My mother, Elaine Whitmore, was the planner, the organizer, the woman who remembered birthdays and sent handwritten thank you notes and chaired committees without ever asking for help. My father, Robert Whitmore, was steady and practical, an accountant by training, the kind of man who fixed things around the house and balanced the checkbook every Sunday afternoon. My brother, Evan, was the golden one. Charming, athletic, the kind of kid teachers liked without trying, the kind of adult who always landed on his feet. And then there was me, Claire, the responsible one, the helper, the one who had it together. Growing up, I wore that label like armor. I got good grades, I followed rules, I didn't cause trouble. When my parents needed someone to stay home with Evan while they attended a charity dinner, I volunteered. When my mom was overwhelmed, I stepped in. When something needed to be handled quietly, I handled it. I learned early that being dependable made me valuable, and being valuable made me loved. At least, that's what I thought. I left home for college at 18 with a single suitcase and a scholarship to the University of Illinois. I studied communications, not because it was my passion, but because it was practical. I graduated early, got a job in marketing, moved to Chicago. I didn't struggle the way some of my friends did. I paid my rent, built my career slowly, moved from agency work into in-house roles, learned how to negotiate, how to present, how to stay calm under pressure. I became the woman people relied on. At work, that meant staying late, fixing mistakes that weren't mine, smoothing conflicts between departments. At home, it meant everything else. When my parents wanted to renovate the kitchen, I researched contractors. When my dad needed help with technology, I came over after work. When my mom volunteered me to organize a fundraiser, I smiled and did it. When Evan dropped out of grad school and needed time to figure things out, I helped him rewrite his resume. When Evan needed a place to stay for a few months, my parents asked if I could help with the deposit on his apartment. Just until he gets on his feet, my mom said. He was 29. I said yes. Of course I did. Because I always did. By the time I turned 30, I was earning more than either of my parents had at my age. I had no debt, a decent savings account, a small condo on the north side. I didn't feel rich. I felt stretched. Every time I saved, something came up. A car repair for my parents, a loan to Evan, a family emergency that somehow landed on my shoulders. I told myself this was normal, that families helped each other, that I was lucky to be able to contribute. What I didn't notice, what no one ever pointed out, was that the help only flowed in one direction. When Evan landed a job through a friend of my dad's, everyone celebrated his independence. When I asked my parents for emotional support after a brutal breakup, my mother patted my hand and said, "You're strong. You'll be fine." When Evan needed advice, my father sat with him for hours. When I was overwhelmed, I was told to take a deep breath. I became very good at taking deep breaths. The real shift happened when my parents decided to refinance their house. They'd lived in the same 4-bedroom colonial for over 30 years. The mortgage was nearly paid off, but my mother wanted to remodel again. This time, she wanted everything updated: floors, bathrooms, landscaping. "It'll increase the value," she said. I helped them run the numbers. I always did. But this time, the math didn't quite work. The lender wanted a cosigner. "I don't feel comfortable asking Evan," my mom said quickly. "He's just getting started." They didn't even ask if I was comfortable. They assumed. And because I'd never said no before, I signed. That was the moment I stopped being just the reliable daughter. That was the moment I became an asset. At first, nothing changed. Then, small things did. My mother started mentioning money more often. Not directly, never directly, but in the way she sighed when bills came up, in the way she praised Evan for being careful with his finances while gently reminding me that I was so fortunate. My father began looping me into decisions that had nothing to do with me, asking my opinion, leaning on my judgment. It felt flattering. It also felt heavy. I started noticing how often my name came up when solutions were needed. Not ideas, solutions. When my parents argued with Evan about rent, my mom would glance at me across the table. When something broke, my dad would say, "Claire might know." When a check needed to be written, my mother would say, "Let's talk to Claire." And still, no one asked how I was doing. Not really. The morning in the kitchen, the strawberries, the conversation about boundaries, that was when the fog lifted. Because I finally heard the truth behind the politeness. I wasn't the daughter who helped. I was the daughter who could be managed, controlled, contained. She's fine for now. That phrase replayed in my head for days. Fine. As long as I didn't expect anything. As long as I stayed available. As long as I didn't ask for recognition or support or a seat at the table when decisions were made about me. I drove home that afternoon with a tight chest and a buzzing mind. I replayed years of conversations, moments that had felt small at the time, but now lined up into something clearer. They weren't planning to hurt me. They just didn't think they were doing anything wrong. And that, somehow, hurt more. That night, I sat alone in my condo with my laptop open, my budget spreadsheet on the screen. I looked at the numbers, what I'd given, what I'd signed, what I was still responsible for. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I'd never allowed before. What happens if I stop? I didn't have the answer yet, but I felt the shift. A quiet one, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that changes everything. The first thing that changed after the refinance wasn't money. It was tone. My mother began speaking to me differently, not colder exactly, but more intentional. Conversations that used to feel casual suddenly had a purpose. Every call came with a reason. Every visit had an agenda. "Since you're already so good with numbers," she'd say, sliding paperwork across the table. "You don't mind, right?" was her favorite phrases. And because I'd spent my entire life proving that I didn't mind, I kept saying no, I didn't. At work, I was in the middle of a major rebrand for a healthcare client. 12-hour days, back-to-back meetings, the kind of mental exhaustion that sits behind your eyes and makes even small decisions feel heavy. At home, my phone never stopped buzzing. Questions, requests, updates I hadn't asked for but was expected to solve. When I didn't answer right away, my mother left voicemails that started cheerful and ended sharp. "I just thought you'd want to know. I guess you're busy. We'll figure it out ourselves if you can't." The guilt was subtle, but relentless. I started taking calls in stairwells, responding to emails from my parents during lunch breaks, reviewing bank statements while waiting for ride shares. My life began to feel like a series of overlapping obligations, none of which were actually mine. The first real conflict came over something small, or what I thought was small. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was sitting on my couch, laptop balanced on my knees, trying to catch up on work I hadn't finished during the week. My phone rang. My mother's name lit up the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Hi, Mom." "Claire," she said, breathless. "I need you to transfer some money." I closed my laptop. "How much?" "Just 5,000, she replied quickly. "It's temporary." Temporary. That word again. "For what?" There was a pause, just a fraction of a second. "Your father's credit card got flagged. It's nothing serious. We just need to cover a payment before Monday." I frowned. "Didn't you just refinance?" "Yes, but..." "And Evan?" Another pause. "He has his own expenses right now." I swallowed. "I'm a little tight this month," I said carefully. "Can we look at it next week?" The silence on the other end was immediate and heavy. "I didn't realize you were struggling," my mother said. I almost laughed. Almost. "I'm not struggling," I said. "I just need some notice." "Well," she replied coolly, "we wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." I transferred the money. I hated myself for how relieved I felt when the tension disappeared from her voice. It didn't stop there. Once I'd hesitated once, they started pushing more. Questions became expectations. Expectations became assumptions. One evening, my father called and casually mentioned that he'd put my name down as the emergency contact for a new insurance policy. "It made sense," he said. "You're reliable." Another time, my mother asked if I'd be willing to float a contractor payment until her bonus came through. When I pointed out that I'd already helped with a refinance, she sighed. "I thought family helped family." So did I. I just hadn't realized I was the only one expected to. The breaking point didn't come with a scream. It came with a spreadsheet. I was reviewing my finances late one night, trying to understand why I felt like I was always catching up, despite earning more than ever. I pulled up my bank statements. 6 months. 12 months. 2 years. The numbers were undeniable. I'd given my family more than $40,000. Not gifts, not investments, not agreements, just help. Untracked, unacknowledged. I stared at the total until my eyes blurred. Then I scrolled further. The co-signed loan. The liability. The quiet risk I'd absorbed without complaint. And something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly. Like a rope finally breaking under too much weight. I started noticing things I couldn't unsee. How my parents spoke about Evan versus how they spoke about me. How his mistakes were framed as learning experiences, while my boundaries were treated as inconveniences. How no one ever asked me what I wanted. Not once. Not about my career, not about my future. Not about whether I was okay carrying everyone else. At a family dinner a few weeks later, my mother mentioned, offhandedly, that Evan was thinking about buying a condo. "That's wonderful," I said, forcing a smile. "He'll probably need some help with the down payment," she continued, looking directly at me. The table went quiet. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "I'm not in a position to do that," I said calmly. The reaction was immediate. My father frowned, my mother stiffened. Evan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Well," my mother said slowly, "we just assumed." I set my fork down. "I can't," I repeated. It was the first time I'd ever said no without apologizing. The air felt different afterward. Tense. Charged. Dinner ended early. I drove home with shaking hands. The next day, my mother called. "I think we need to talk about your attitude," she said. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "My attitude?" "You've been distant," she continued. "Resistant. It's not like you." I pulled my car over. "This is me," I said quietly. "I've just been quiet before." She didn't respond. Instead, she said something that cut deeper than any argument could have. "We're worried about you, Claire. You seem bitter." Bitter. For wanting boundaries. For noticing imbalance. For finally seeing the truth. I hung up without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment where I'd chosen peace over honesty. Every time I'd swallowed discomfort to keep things smooth. I realized something terrifying. If I didn't change anything, This would be my life forever. Not just now, not just this year, forever. I would always be the backup, the buffer, the solution. And no one would ever thank me for it, because they didn't see it as sacrifice. They saw it as my role. The breaking point came a week later. My father called me into a meeting with their financial advisor. No warning, no context. I arrived after work, tired and already irritated. They sat across from me at the conference table, documents spread out neatly. "We've been thinking long-term," my father began. "And," my mother added, "it makes sense for you to be more formally involved." "Involved how?" I asked. They slid a paper toward me, a proposal. They wanted me to consolidate some of my savings into a shared family account for flexibility. They spoke in calm voices, rational tones, as if this was a favor. I stared at the paper. Then I pushed it back. "No," I said. The room went silent. "What do you mean, no?" my mother asked. "I mean no," I replied. "I'm not doing this." My father's expression hardened. "We're trying to protect everyone," he said. "By putting me at risk?" I asked. My mother's voice sharpened. "You're being dramatic." And that was it. That was the moment. I stood up. "I'm done," I said. "With what?" my father asked. "With being the solution to problems I didn't create," I replied. "With being expected to give without being asked. With being treated like I don't deserve consideration." They stared at me like I'd spoken another language. My mother scoffed. "You're overreacting." Maybe, but for the first time in my life, I didn't doubt myself. I walked out, and I didn't look back. That night, alone in my condo, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a vengeful one, a quiet, deliberate one. I would stop explaining. I would stop rescuing. I would stop shrinking to fit a role that no longer served me. I didn't know yet what that would cost, but I knew exactly what staying would. I didn't announce my decision to anyone. There was no family meeting, no emotional speech, no list of grievances. I simply stopped. Stopped answering calls immediately. Stopped volunteering information. Stopped filling the silence when it got uncomfortable. At first, it felt wrong, like walking without a brace I'd worn for years. Every instinct in me wanted to smooth things over, to explain myself, to make sure no one felt hurt or confused. But I had spent enough of my life making sure everyone else felt comfortable. Now it was my turn. The first step wasn't legal or financial. It was emotional distance. I let calls go to voicemail. I responded to texts with short, neutral replies. I stopped offering solutions. When my mother called to complain about a contractor issue, I said, "I'm sure you'll figure it out." When my father asked me to review paperwork, I said, "I don't have the capacity right now." When Evan texted asking if I could spot him for something minor, I replied, "I can't." No explanation, no apology, just facts. The backlash was immediate. My mother's messages grew longer. My father's tone turned colder. Evan stopped texting altogether. And something unexpected happened. Nothing broke. The world didn't end. The family didn't collapse. They adjusted. Not gracefully, but they adjusted. And that told me everything I needed to know. The second step was practical. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. Not because I was planning a lawsuit, because I needed to understand my exposure. Her office was quiet and professional, the kind of space that smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She reviewed the refinance documents carefully, flipping through pages with practiced precision. "You're liable," she said plainly, "but only under specific conditions." I nodded. "What I want to know," I said, "is how to protect myself." She leaned back in her chair. "Then the first thing you need," she replied, "is documentation." So I started documenting everything, every transfer, every request, every assumption made on my behalf. I created folders, spreadsheets, timelines, not out of anger, out of self-respect. At the same time, I began untangling my life from theirs. I changed passwords, updated emergency contacts, removed my name from shared accounts where possible. Each small action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I didn't tell them I was doing it. I didn't owe them an explanation. They'd never explained why my needs were always optional. The real shift came when my mother invited me to lunch. Her tone was sugary sweet, the way it always got when she wanted something. "I just feel like we've been disconnected," she said. "I miss you." We met at a quiet cafe near her house. She talked for 20 minutes straight, about stress, about finances, about how hard things had been for her. I listened. Then she paused and said, "So, we were wondering if you could help again, just temporarily." There it was. I took a sip of my coffee. "No," I said. She blinked. "I'm not able to do that," I continued, "and I won't be in the future." Her smile vanished. "This isn't like you," she said sharply. "I know," I replied. "That's the point." She accused me of changing, of being selfish, of abandoning family. I didn't argue. I simply stood up, paid my bill, and left. I cried in my car afterward, not because I regretted it, but because it hurt to finally see the truth so clearly. That night, I wrote myself a promise. I didn't type it. I wrote it by hand. I will no longer fund relationships that only survive because I sacrifice myself. I folded the paper and placed it in my nightstand, and then I got to work. The plan wasn't revenge. It was independence. I increased my savings rate, redirected money that had been leaking out of my life for years. I met with a financial advisor, one who worked for me, not my family. We talked about contingencies, worst-case scenarios, exit strategies. For the first time, my future felt like mine. Weeks passed. The silence from my family grew louder. Then came the guilt. My mother sent long emails about everything she'd done for me. My father reminded me of family values. Evan finally texted, "Did we do something wrong?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, "I've been doing something right. That's the difference." He never responded. The final piece of the plan came quietly, a notice from the bank, a review period triggered by the refinance. Nothing alarming, but enough to remind me that my name was still tied to theirs. I realized something important. Distance wasn't enough. I needed protection. I scheduled one more meeting with my lawyer. This time we talked about timelines, about leverage, about what happened if things went bad. She didn't promise miracles. She promised clarity. And clarity, I was learning, was power. By the time my birthday approached, I felt different. Calmer, stronger, unapologetic. I didn't know yet how everything would resolve, but I knew this. I would never again be quietly written into someone else's plan without my consent. I had stopped being available, and in doing so, I had finally become free. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It never does. It came in pieces. Phone calls, emails, long pauses where something should have been said and wasn't. For weeks after I pulled back, my parents tried to pretend everything was normal. They invited me to dinner, sent polite texts, spoke carefully, like people walking across a frozen lake, unsure how much weight it could still hold. But underneath that politeness, something was shifting. Because the system they had built, the one that quietly relied on me absorbing pressure, was starting to fail. The first crack came from the bank. My father called one afternoon, his voice tight. "There's an issue with the refinance," he said. "They need updated income documentation." I didn't respond right away. "Claire?" he prompted. "I'm not involved in that anymore," I said calmly. A pause. "Well, your name is still—" "I know," I replied, "but I won't be providing anything further." He exhaled sharply. "You're putting us in a difficult position." I almost laughed. "No," I said. "I'm just no longer preventing one." The line went quiet. Things escalated after that. The bank requested additional guarantees. The contractor threatened delays. Bills that had once been quietly handled began stacking up. My parents tried to shield Evan from it. They always did, but reality has a way of spreading. One evening, Evan showed up at my condo unannounced. He looked different, tired, less confident. "They're stressed," he said. "You know that, right?" I leaned against the counter and studied him. "They've always been stressed," I replied. "I just used to fix it." "That's what families do," he insisted. "No," I said gently. "That's what I did." He didn't argue, because for the first time, there was nothing to argue with. A week later, my mother called me in tears. Actual tears this time. Not frustration, not disappointment, fear. "We need your help," she said. "Just one more time." I closed my eyes. "How?" I asked. "We need you to talk to the bank, to reassure them." I pictured every late night, every transfer, every unspoken expectation. "I can't," I said. Her voice hardened instantly. "After everything we've done for you?" That was the line, the one she'd always kept in reserve. I opened my eyes. "You didn't do those things for me," I said evenly. "You did them because you expected something in return." She gasped. "That's not fair." "No," I replied, "but it is accurate." She hung up, and I knew then that whatever relationship we had before was gone. The consequences unfolded quickly after that. The refinance stalled. The contractor pulled out. Fees piled up. My parents were forced to make decisions they'd postponed for years. They sold assets. They downsized plans. They stopped pretending. Evan moved back home. The irony wasn't lost on me. The legal disentanglement took longer. Months of paperwork. Careful communication through attorneys. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. And when my name was finally removed from the liability, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not triumph. Relief. Because the weight I'd been carrying wasn't anger. It was responsibility that had never been mine. I didn't attend the family meeting where everything was discussed. I heard about it later through a cousin. Voices raised, blame passed around, questions asked too late. Apparently, my mother said, "She changed." She was right. I had. My life, on the other hand, began to expand in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant drain, financial and emotional, I slept better. I stopped bracing for my phone to ring. I took a vacation without checking email. At work, I said no to things that didn't align, and yes to things that did. I got promoted 6 months later, not because I worked harder, but because I stopped working for everyone else. The last time I saw my parents was at a neutral event, a cousin's wedding. We exchanged polite words, no accusations, no apologies, just distance. And honestly, that was enough. I didn't need closure from them. I had given it to myself. Here's what I learned, and what I want every woman like me to hear. If you are always the strong one, if you are always the responsible one, if your needs are optional but your support is assumed, that isn't love. That's convenience. And the moment you stop being convenient, the truth becomes visible. You don't owe anyone unlimited access to your time, your money, or your emotional labor. Not even family. Especially not family. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you finally succeeded at choosing yourself.